And the other aspect of meaning, right, is really that relational component. It's making a difference in somebody's life somewhere and getting that feedback, right? And so those, in a very small perspective, are really kind of necessary. As I would say, if you want consistency, they're necessary as daily components.
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And one of them is when you run a nonprofit, getting sponsors, right? I mean, y'all are starting to grow. You know, is the sponsorship keeping up with the signups? That's the big question.
You know, the math at the AGM will tell for sure. But we're very fortunate with the Engage Foundation that I think our sponsorship and our community support has outpaced the program in past years. We were supposed to have a fundraiser this year. We actually canceled it because we had 120 kids signed up for the league, and we thought, all right, let's focus on that. Do a big fundraiser next year. But yeah, no, our sponsors take great care of us. So. Very thankful for them and very thankful for my team because I have done next to zero sponsorship hunting. I get to focus on rugby and operations, so that's always great. That's
the way it's supposed to be when you're the one in charge.
Yes, sir. Shout out to I got to give him the shout out then Keegan Mueller, who does a lot of that for us. He's great, yeah. great member of the board.
That's awesome. And just a quick shout out to an SF brother. I got to share this too. It's called A Team Sergeant's Handbook, written by former 10th Group Team Sergeant Tom Kelly. Great book, lots of lessons, not just for, take the Army piece off of it, and leadership lessons in this book are unbelievable. I'm enjoying the hell out of it. And Tom sent us a copy of this, and one of these days you'll get this worn out copy when you get a chance. So check Tom's book out on Amazon. It's called A Team Sergeant's Handbook, and it's got the team sergeant rank there, the 3 chevrons and the 3 rockers. You can't miss it. Great leadership lessons and great stories. It's be a great book. I think it'll be sitting in every Special Forces team room here in the near future. And speaking of references, our good friend Timothy Ford joining us today. Timothy, man, I feel like it's taken a lot of heavy lifting to coordinate us all getting together at the same time. Do you have that same feeling?
Not necessarily, but I'm glad it finally happened. This is great. You guys, I love talking with you guys.
Yeah, man. And we're excited to jump into it. So share with us a leadership thought that you go to with your clients.
A leadership thought. Well, I think one common thread that works its way through all of my work is absolutely habits, unquestionably habits. And lately I've been really leaning into the idea of a keystone habit. Really, it's just a habit that, you really nail, you really dial in. And once you have that, you can quickly add a bunch of new habits on top of it to help you more quickly and effortlessly accomplish whatever it is you're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Hey, tell us what you mean by keystone. I know, but I'd be willing to bet there's a lot of folks that don't understand why that they've probably heard other people say it and they've never asked. So I'm going to ask you to explain what you mean by keystone.
Sure. Yeah. I'm glad you asked. I mean, I'm not a builder. I believe the metaphor comes from that little stone in the center of an arch, right? And it's kind of a key to the strength and the integrity of that arch shape, right? Strong architectural shape. So it's a metaphor, but in this case, we're talking about human behavior. We're talking about taking action as a leader, as a business owner, as anybody who cares about anything, right? When it comes down to it, action creates results. And so what we consistently do gives us consistent results. And that keystone habit is really the first and most important. And sometimes it can be a little deceptive. It can be a really simple one. But it's a habit that you really nail, you really dial in, you get it humming along. And then once those things are in place, you can just add a bunch of other habits by little tiny tweaks in your environment. And so it's an accelerator, if you will. Think about it as a results accelerator. Does that help explain it?
Oh yeah. Thanks. And I'll, as a former engineer, I'm all over the whole Keystone. It comes from the stone bridges that were built in the Dark Ages, Middle Ages, and you build the stones up into this arc, and when it hits this point at the very top, that's the keystone. And what it is the physics of it is the arcs push against that keystone, and that's what holds it all together. So it is the critical piece, and it's still I'm not destroying the metaphor. It still is that's the thing that holds the whole bridge together. That keeps it from just plopping down into the river. So yeah, that's where it literally comes from. It's a keystone. So thank you for giving your definition of it for the application of habits in life also.
Yeah, and I'm curious about that. If we could talk a little bit about what maybe some examples are, because what comes to mind for me, and I think I have never used the term keystone habits in my coaching, but I think that there's a concept I use a lot, which is the building of a small habit that you can expand upon, just like you're talking about there. The example that comes to mind immediately, if I was like, okay, what's the keystone habit for me? What's the thing that if I do this right, everything else will get better? The one that comes to mind immediately, I feel like it's an easy example. So I want you to come up with some other ones, Timothy, which is like the morning routine of like my wake up, like getting up early and, working out right away or something like that, where it's like that clearly primes the rest of your day, sets up those windows where then it's like, if I'm up early and I'm already working out, well, then I can read my book. Then I could do this. You can layer things on top of that. Could you give me an example that's maybe a little bit less, I don't know, straightforward, I guess?
Yeah. You say less straightforward?
Less straightforward, because to me that's the easy. It's like the morning, and then you build on top of it. I think that's a clear example, but I'm trying to think of another way to look at it.
Yeah. Well, that's a key one. I mean, maybe let me give you two. So on the business side, a client that I had really nailed this. And let's just give it set a little context, right? So this guy owned his own business. I think, like a lot of business owners, was distracted or little. He struggled to figure out where he should spend his time and energy, especially first thing in the day, and that was stressful for him. And so for him, a keystone habit was sort of after he also had a family. He had 2 kids, right, in school. And so after he kind of completed his morning routine with his family, got his kids off to school, his first thing he would do is come home, come into the kitchen, grab his cup of coffee, walk into his office and sit down at his desk and write out his priorities for the day, right? 3 priorities for the day. What are the 3 important actions for today? And for him, that was a keystone habit. That's maybe a simple one. It's maybe part of the morning routine, so it doesn't fit your criteria necessarily. I'm trying. But for him, that allowed him to really organize his day, to focus on getting those things done. And there were cascading effects on the other actions and the other habits that he did as a result of that. So that really was an orienting habit. And because of getting that basic routine in and making it a daily routine, it unlocks, if you will, all these bigger long-term things he wanted to accomplish, both in his business and in his personal life. He was able to start building the cabin where he likes to fly fish, for example, on his property. He started his exercise routine and got that back going again. He started developing key relationships for his business where a lot of his referrals were coming from. He realized he needed a better afternoon routine as well. So these are just kind of the cascading effects, right? And because he was getting all that done during the day, he also felt much more able to be present with his family in the evenings. When his kids came home, he could help them with their homework, spend time with his wife, that kind of thing. So really it also enabled, let's just say, a better life balance with lower stress. Completely different example, personal example, right? Like with a personal goals and exercise routine. Another client, strictly on the exercise side, let's just say he was an exercise expert, but he still, because of being busy with work, being busy with family, with young kids, he really struggled, mostly from exhaustion and also lack of time, to really nail a morning routine for his workouts. And because of that, he saw his health suffering over years. When it came down to it, the Keystone Habit was showing up in his workout room for 30 seconds only and just doing a quick 30-second warm-up every morning in his workout clothes. That's it. That's literally it. And after that habit was humming along, he's like, well, I'm here. I'm warmed up. I'm awake. I might as well do like one set on all of my little workout stations I have organized, right? And you can see where this is going. That became an 8-minute routine that he does basically every day without fail. Doesn't have to force himself to do it. He's not relying on willpower. He just automatically gets up because his commitment really is just show up in that environment. Do that 30-second warm-up. That's it. That's success. But because we're all creatures of that environmental influence, 90% of the time, he's doing those workouts every morning. And as a result, he's pretty much back to his former shape and health level, and he's now on track to be in the best shape of his life.
That is so true, and it's such a great point that I think we all have to remember. I find it personal. For me, workout, that's the easy thing. That's the easy habit. Always has been for me, probably because I did it, had to do it every morning for 25, 30 years. And when you do something like that, just becomes who you are. But the other piece of that I want to dive into and talk with you about a little bit more is, well, if you can do it in one category of your life, if you will, well, shouldn't you be able to do it in another? And have you had that sort of dealings with clients where you're like, hey, dude, you got this habit that you've created. How come you can't do that habit?
Yeah. I mean, the habit creation process is really the same. And like you said, it applies to all life areas, including business. And, I'm really on fire as to, what's possible in business when people really leverage that for themselves and then for their teams, right? I mean, because you can apply this everywhere. You can apply it to, oh goodness. I think the habit of, creating clarity, right? Clarity of vision, clarity of purpose as a leader and as an organization, and consistently communicating that down, right? I've heard it said, leaders, one of the most important jobs of leaders is to narrate the journey for everybody in their organization. Because otherwise everyone's just kind of along for that ride and they don't really know where the car is going. They're in a dark room somewhere, as if you're in a car driving across country and everyone else is kind of, all the windows are blacked out. They can't see where they're going. They have no idea. So as a leader, we have to narrate that journey, narrate that vision. That's part of it. I think it applies to vision and communication. It applies to the way that we manage. It applies to, any of the principles that we apply to success. So being consistent, right? How consistent are we at applying the powerful principles that that I'm sure you guys talk about, in your podcast and are very aware of in your business?
I'm curious, staying in clarity a little bit there, Timothy. I think there's an interesting idea of, it's like, why do people fail in these areas? It's always an interesting question. And to me, it goes back to my favorite analogy of it is comes from the economist Richard Thaler, talks about the thinker and the doer, kind of that macro and micro view, that there's this person in the micro, the doer, who is constantly trying to maximize short-term utility. And there's the thinker who sees the big picture. And what I found is with my own clients that a lot of the time, these issues arise from being stuck in the wrong mindset from where you need to be. And, if I need to get this work done, there's not much point being the thinker right now. I need to be the doer. If I am spending all my time as the thinker, then you get so worked up, so anxious about all the big picture things that you have trouble taking actual actions with that. Could you talk some about how maybe a literal example or, more conceptual, how habits can help to frame that? Because I think most of those problems just come from thinking about the macro when you should be thinking about the micro, or vice versa. And so a habit to frame that properly could make a big difference in a lot of people's lives, I would guess.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things we could talk about along those lines. It's a great question. I mean, the thing that I see a lot with small business owners is they're really making the mistake of working too much in the business as opposed to on the business. Mm-hmm. And that's what I immediately thought of when you said, the macro versus micro perspective. Yep. I mean, I think when we are spending most of our time as business owners doing the day-to-day delivery and maybe the marketing and maybe the quality control and, payment fulfillment and accounting and all, the task never ends. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very easy to lose sight of where am I even going with this business, right? And I worked with a business owner recently who really wasn't sure how much money she was even making based on the time she was putting into her business, right? She didn't know her hourly rate. She had no idea. We worked through some simple math and figured that out, and she was shocked. She was actually a little sad that it was lower than she'd liked it to be, but knowledge is power. She's figuring out next steps. I think so. Being able to maybe part of it, in those initial small business stages, is being able to routinely, maybe once a week, step out if you have to be the one delivering most of those things in those very early stages of a startup. Okay. But at least set aside an hour a week to step outside and say, all right, what's my 10-year vision? Reconnect with your 10-year vision. Reconnect with a 3 or 5-year vision, and then the 1-year plan, and then maybe quarterly, big priorities each quarter to get to that 1-year plan that's going to work towards your 3 and 5-year plan, right? So reconnect weekly. That would be, I think, a good habit. It's more of a routine, a weekly routine, but calendar blocked, early stage startup, spend that time reconnecting with the macro view as opposed to spending all your time in the micro view.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about a couple of times. I think maybe just in the last handful of shows, it's same thing as came up, whatever the right word is.
You making up words again. You Texans.
Yeah, I know. That's all right. I'm authorized. I got a piece of paper on the wall that says you can make up words. But
is that a degree from Texas A&M?
It is. But it is that whole sense of, if you're not spending some time thinking, then all your decisions are reactionary. And that's a problem, right? In the Army, we used to call it, we'd always talk about the metaphor of the shooting range. And the shooting range, you'd have the 25-meter silhouette, and then you'd have them all the way out to 300 meters at various distances. Well, you got docked, and this is kind of ironic. You got docked if you didn't take care of the 25-meter, which is also a lot easier to hit because, by the way, the dude's a lot bigger at that point. And the 300-meter. It's an interesting thing when you think about that, because you spend all this time knocking down the 25-meter and you never see that 300-meter. And in the real world, that 300-meter eventually is going to become the 25-meter. And now I haven't done anything to change or prepare. What's a way that you help your clients shift to get out of that, knocking down even the 5-meter target, if you will, that thing is right there in your face, to where they can separate themselves and say, well, let me think and see if there's any 300 or 500 meter targets out there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little tricky, I think, because not everybody is good at it. Some people are good at it, and they can do it to some extent on their own with the right prompting, the right questions, they can do it. But I think a more reliable approach would be to get out of your if you're doing your work from home or from a particular office or building, and that's where you're doing a lot of this delivery and working in the business in those early stages, get out of that environment. Get some perspective. Even if it's going to a nearby coffee shop, get out of the environment physically, take a notebook and a pen, maybe you take some headphones or something and create your own little environment in that coffee shop, somewhere where it's ideally, you can be undistracted for at least an hour and reconnect with that vision. But I think that, we're going back to like the environment, why the Keystone Habit is so effective. We're creatures of environments, right? So that's why I say get out of that environment. Wherever you're doing that work, get out of the environment and the distractions and all the environmental cues that are in that environment that are telling you, oh, get back to work. You need to, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. These clients are screaming or whatever. You got to get out of that 25-meter environment and say, oh, look at that guy up on the hill. That's where we're going. That's what I need to hit.
I'd be interested if you could talk some about the skill of it, like you were saying. It's like some people aren't good at it, because I always think that's such an interesting thing. Whether you're like naturally, adept at being a leader, communicating, whatever it is. When things come easily to us, we are usually pretty blind to how crappy other people can be at those skills. Could you talk some about your experience with that? Because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a couple components there. I mean, some people are more naturally, we could say farsighted. They're going to see that 300-meter target better than others who are more naturally nearsighted. But, I think part of it also is definitely learned and chosen. It's why are you in business in the first place? Why are you what's your purpose in the first place? Why are you doing what you're doing in the first place? So, tribe and purpose, like what's the purpose here? What got you here? And where is that heading for you? So it's really spending time getting clear on that. I don't know if that's so much as a skill as it is just something you sit with. So like an inquiry in a way, being willing and able to examine those deeper questions for yourself. Mm-hmm. When I think about it for myself and for a lot of my clients, they're ultimately doing things. They're either doing something because they want to make a difference in the world. It's something they deeply care about. Or they found a way to leverage just things they were already good at to make a difference that ultimately makes them feel good and gives them some meaning. So it's connecting to something with meaning, right? And without that component, let's just say that meaning component, mm-hmm. getting and just being able to answer like what are you here to do? Maybe for some people that's a religious question. For some it's more of a philosophical question, but I think as men we like to be on a mission and with a purpose and very clear. We're really good at that. And when we don't have that, it's easy to get derailed. It's easy to just completely lose sight of where you're going and what's important. So I think it's really, I think it's a habit more than anything else. Mm-hmm. I like to reconnect with it for even 5 minutes a day. Yeah. So for me, it's as you said, Cam, part of that morning routine. Right after I do my workout in the morning, I sit for at least a couple minutes. Usually it's more like 10 to 20 minutes. But it depends on the day, and just reconnect with that sense. What's the vision? Why am I doing this? What's important? And personally, for me, it's about really just looking at all the aspects of who I am, right? The pieces that I didn't choose, who I was born to, the culture I was born in, the country, the language, all that stuff. The parents, whatever, the schools, and then all the things after that I chose, high school, college, degree areas, skills, habits, trying to look at all of that somewhat objectively and using feedback from others and from mentors and guides and, trying to use all of that to the best of my ability. So that's how I personally answer it, is like, what am I best able to do? And, some authors, have talked about this in terms of unique ability. You guys may have heard that term. Another way into this question is, what do you really enjoy? What are you really good at? And what do you really enjoy in your work? What aspects of it do you really enjoy? Okay. How can you spend more time doing that? Mm-hmm. And then what else do you do in your spare time or in your life that you enjoy? Like, look at the other aspects of what make you who you are. Like, for example, I studied photography in undergraduate. For a long time, I thought that was relatively not applicable to my career. But only recently, as I've started to do more public speaking, did I realize, like, I'm getting all these metaphors that are like visual and artists based and even like spiritual based in the moment, that are kind of like this observational perspective. Where is it coming from? And I started searching like for quotes, and like over half of them were photographers. I was like, oh my goodness, how did I not see that? So in a way, it's arriving back at knowing ourselves in a more deep way, knowing all these different aspects of ourselves, and how we can, getting a little creative, asking how we can use those different aspects of ourselves for that purpose, in that mission, in the thing that we already enjoy, that we're already good at, and just spending more time on that.
I love that. And I got a follow-up thing I want to get into, Dad, because it's something that I think you and I might have talked about off air, maybe in some of our coaching calls, but I think is a very, very interesting question when it comes to purpose and the pursuit of your purpose, and using that as that like source of motivation, being purpose driven, which is this interesting push and pull that comes from having a really big purpose that is so far away, and it can feel like it's, too far away for you to work towards also. But then there's also this aspect of like, I need something big. It's got to be exciting. Otherwise, what's the point to get out of bed in the morning if I'm not working towards something big? And then the third piece that I'll throw in there is the other aspect of, well, can I really solve that big problem? I think it's a very interesting piece there, because there's a realism to it. Can I change the world? Yeah, I could change the community. I could change a few people's lives. I think there's a realism there, but it's like, is it worth casting to that super high level? And I want to throw that over to you first there, Dad. What do you think of trying to balance those kind of three elements there?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think if something that drives you, like if your purpose is so broad, but it still drives you, then it can be a purpose. If your purpose is to solve world hunger, mm-hmm. and that's something you get up every morning and do your actions to solve world hunger, that's okay. I think that's okay, because that's huge. That's broad. Right. Mine is to create a legacy of leaders. Well, what is that? And I think that's the difference between what a purpose is and what a goal or a vision are, because those is what a goal or a vision is, to use correct grammar again. But that's to me, that's the difference. You can have a purpose that is, I'm going to solve world hunger. That is my purpose. But here's my objective. Here's my vision. Here's my goal is, I'm going to make sure that 3 kids have lunch every day for this month. Mm-hmm. That's pretty good right there, isn't it? Pretty definable. What about you, Timothy? How would you delineate that?
Yeah, can you just restate the question, Camden? I got most of it. I just want to make sure that I'm kind of staying on track with it.
Basically, I think there's 3 elements when it comes to being purpose-driven that I think are important, that are kind of tough to balance, which is, one, it's, having something big gives you more motivation, helps you to feel like you're more connected with it. But then at the same time, the bigger something gets, the more disconnected you may feel, because it is so far away. It's so hard to do. If you are committing yourself to solving world hunger every single day and you ain't fed nobody yet, that's a tough place to be in mentally, right? And then I think the third piece there is the kind of the sizing of that purpose and of the goal, I guess, to start using your terms there, Dad, to separate it a bit. But the is it worth taking it to that super high level to where it makes it really big and super motivating, but you might not ever reach that? I'll give you another example, Dad. You talk about world hunger, because you could go and cure world hunger. That is something that somebody out there is working towards. I could use, and this is in one life category of mine, but, in my purpose of, problem solving, helping people, building that legacy of leaders like you talk about, Dad. When I think of rugby all the time, I think it's like, well, yeah, if I could get everyone playing rugby and all the kids playing rugby, and they would learn so many life lessons and they would do all this in this perfect utopia because everyone was playing touch rugby with Engage when they were
the rugby utopia.
And that ain't realistic. But at the same time, and I say the same thing with my coaching clients, it's kind of nice to have that picture at the same time. So it's a weird balance there. So I hope that helps, Timothy. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a couple things. I think, first of all, I've studied psychology a lot, and I think it's a real strength for me. And I think one of the things I've really learned is just how little actual free will we have. We think we are thinking beings that occasionally have feelings, but in actuality, we're feeling beings that occasionally think. And, it's really that emotional life, whether or not we admit it. And I think generally men are worse at admitting it than women. Women are better at it, is to say, generally, not always, but really just acknowledging why we do what we do. And BJ Fogg said this best: people change when they feel good, and people do things that make them feel good. Right. Mm-hmm. And broadly speaking, not to get too theoretical here, but there's three types of feel goods, right? There's the things that give us pleasure and joy in the moment. There's flow or deep work, the experience of flow in your work. And then there's, broadly speaking, meaning, the feeling of satisfaction and meaning from your work. All three of those are actually important. And when you're looking at, as you said, Cam, it's a great question. When you're looking at these big, impossible, seemingly impossible goals and striving, realistically, humans can't work towards those in a way where they're deferring satisfaction and joy and feeling good for very long. They have to feel something pretty much daily. Mm-hmm. So there has to be some pleasure and some enjoyment every day in the work, right? They have to, even if it's just tiny little increments, they have to be tapping, by the way their work is set up, the flow state, doing some deep work for each person, whatever that looks like for your profession. Losing track of time, losing track of everything else, but being absorbed by what you're doing. That's a very enjoyable experience. And at the end of the day, people tend to feel good from feeling a sense of competence. So seeing that they're getting good at something, they're getting that feedback, immediate feedback, can come from a tool or a task or from a person. And the other aspect of meaning, right, is really that relational component. It's making a difference in somebody's life somewhere, mm-hmm. and getting that feedback, right? And so those, in a very small perspective, are really kind of necessary. Mm-hmm. As I would say, if you want consistency, they're necessary as daily components. I think it also reminds me of at a younger age, I aspired to do the 7 summits. And I only ever really made it to one.
Wow. But still doing one is pretty damn good, dude.
Well, thank you.
Can y'all define that? I guess as a Colorado boy, I should know a term like 7 summits, but I guess I've been in the desert too long.
So the 7 summits would be the 7 highest peaks in the world, and trying the idea of summiting them. Mm-hmm. And so as a training hike, I did the highest peak in the lower 48, which was Mount Whitney. And it's only roughly 50 feet higher than the highest peak in Colorado. But yeah, so did Mount Whitney in a day as a training hike. And then, the only of the 7 summits that I did was Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. So both in Mount Whitney and in Kilimanjaro, I had this experience where it's generally, actually we did Whitney in one day, but both of them, when you start climbing the mountain, you cannot see the summit. You cannot see where you're going. You know it's there. You've got this immense big thing. You're kind of on it, but you just follow the path. And really, it's a lot of like dirt in the face. It's a lot of bright sun, sweat, sliding in the mud, taking breaks, rehydrating, refueling, and getting going again. And eventually, only towards the top can you actually see the summit. And so you're climbing, but like it just stays hard, and you're on track because it's the only mountain here. So there is a sense there, you need a way to stay on track, know you're on track, know you're on the mountain, stay on the path. But yeah, sometimes that's all you have. You cannot see the future. That final state of solving world hunger, right? Maybe it's only these three people today that showed up to be helped. This one person today, these 10 people today, right? That daily cadence.
Yeah, the old false summit, man. Yeah, there's some mental toughness that comes with looking up and seeing that, and then going, oh, when you get there, like just one of the famous things here in Colorado Springs, the Manitou Incline has that about 2/3 of the way up, I think it is.
Just high enough up to make you think you might have actually made it. Yeah.
Yeah. You're going along, you're seeing it, and you're like, all right, that's not too bad. And you get to that step and you're like, oh, I still got a lot more to go, sort of thing. But yeah, those mental aspects. I wanted to go back to the human satisfaction, because it reminds me of Marcus Aurelius, one of his quotes, and I'll summarize it. But why is it that when we do something good, we look for that third thing, and that third thing that he's referring to is that recognition. Look, I did something good. Hey, I helped that little kid to solve world hunger. Give me some.
I am in the process of solving world hunger.
Yes. And I didn't know it's like a psychological thing that I guess we as humans, I just throw that at you for thoughts on that, Timothy.
Yeah. I mean, there are a couple angles into that. I mean, I think one is we're described as ultra social, an ultra social species, kind of like ants. I mean, we're really like a hive mentality. We don't think of ourselves in that way, but we really are. We're just hardwired to be social, to need people, and to need to feel that connection and meaning, and ultimately how we spend our time. Yeah, that's one aspect. I mean, I think the other aspect, to me, it sort of goes back to what's been called the God gene. Like there's a hole in the human heart and it's God shaped. Like that's another quote. But really, what it's just saying is like we all feel this deep, deep drive to serve something bigger than ourselves, whatever that looks like. Doesn't have to be a religious question. Mm-hmm. To feel connected to something bigger, and without that, life just feels like something's missing. It can feel hollow, and we might have all the other indicators of success, but we might not have that that bigger piece. We might still basically be lost without that deeper purpose.
There's another side of that recognition that I think is interesting, Dad. We talked about this a handful of different times, which is the gratitude and accepting gratitude for the things you've done. And actually, I was on one of our leadership interviews this morning, and one of the things that kind of occurred to me, and I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on this. And Timothy, I'll have you go first. But the idea of it's like, well, why do we have trouble accepting gratitude? We're purpose-driven people who love to do work, love to help others, and then someone says thank you, and it makes you feel weird for whatever reason. And there's this weird feeling there. My theory on it that I came up with this morning, early morning, so if it sucks, then we'll just write this off and we'll let Timothy talk the rest of the time. But the idea is my idea on it was that part of the reason we deny that gratitude and kind of spread it to the team and all that kind of stuff is it's a way of making it feel like we don't have the responsibility. Like if I'm thinking, because I've got Engage starts this Saturday, got 120 kids out there. If somebody comes to me and is like, oh my gosh, you did all this. I'm like, no, I didn't. That was the 17 coaches I have out. It's all them. It's all them. And I think it's a way of me pointing to them saying, no, they did it, not me, is a way of me taking that burden that I have as the leader and spreading it out a little bit. What are your thoughts on that, Timothy?
God, Cam, it's such a great question. And, I think multiple thoughts. First of all, true leaders give credit where credit is due. And if you're leading an organization, you're not the one doing most of that work. It depends. Like we've talked about people who are the only person in their business working too much in it and not on it. But on the opposite side of that, when you're leading a large organization, to take all the credit would just be egoic and foolish, right? Like everyone knows you didn't do most of that. So, and then all the stuff in between, right? As small teams, I imagine, Otis could have a lot to say about that, but small, highly functioning teams on a specific mission, they all have unique purposes and unique skill sets and functions on that team, right? And so, you're definitely not going to take credit for the functions of the other people. So part of it is just, I think, acknowledging the team effort that's really, truly actually there. Mm-hmm. Another part of it, which would be more the inner psychological game, is we are pretty bad at celebrating, like authentically celebrating what we do. We ourselves do. And BJ Fogg is, again, I'm referencing him, the Tiny Habits author. He's talked about celebration as kind of a super skill. Alongside gratitude, like you mentioned, Cam. And I would also add appreciation, right? That's the social aspect of kind of gratitude, right? Of really appreciating and giving recognition to your team. But really being able to celebrate and authentically acknowledge, hey, I gave this my best effort. And that's worth something. And, it may not have been perfect. It may not have even given the results that I wanted, but it's worth something. And that is really the best that we can do, is just keep giving our best effort every day. And when we acknowledge ourselves for that, it's powerful. It's meaningful. And the last piece I'll say it's connected to that is like, if we're striving for this huge, huge goal and we're constantly measuring ourselves in relation to that, maybe even unseen summit, that huge goal, you're always going to feel like you're never making it. So that's a horrible way to feel, and it's demotivating, and ultimately that will break you down and take you off your course and out of your mission and purpose. So you really can only evaluate yourself based on where you're at and where you've come from and the progress you've made.
Love that.
That's such a great thing, and I'm snickering to myself because that's how you create them as a leader and somebody who's gone through some exercises where you didn't know what the end state was. You didn't know where there was goalposts, or even if there were goalposts. Mm-hmm. And all you knew was that you just had to continue on and doing the best you could. I used to do that when I was coaching the boys rugby team. Same thing, it's like they don't know how many laps, they don't know how many drills. So that was part of that, creating that mental toughness, because I think that's something that if you can see it, it's always a little bit easier to accomplish it. Those driving through the muck, the mud, the fog, the clouds, if to use the Kilimanjaro sort of thing. You don't know how many more, switchbacks or false summits or anything like that you got to go through. And that takes some mental toughness. And that's part of being successful in life. No question, just wanted to throw that out there for you. Because I got a question that's shifting the subject off of that. So I'll leave it. If you wanted to talk on what I just said some more, I'm more than open to that.
I mean, I would just add, if you're beating yourself up because you're not at the summit, and you haven't done the remaining switchbacks in front of you, you're really just breaking yourself down and taking yourself out of your high performance state, versus looking down and saying, wow, I just did 20 switchbacks. I've only got 5 or 10 more, I'm feeling great. Yeah, this is hard, but I'm almost there. I'm doing it. Look at how far I've come.
That's great to use that as a reference too.
Yeah. I was just going to add real quick before you get to your next question, Dad, I've talked a bunch about how coaching rugby gives me so much perspective, especially different age groups. But that's one thing I think of all the time, whether, you call it the different seasons of life and all that, if your first, 22 years, you as the kid, growing up through college and all that, and you got the next 22 and all those. It's like, if I go out there and I'm coaching these little kids and start holding them to the standard of this really high thing, then they're going to go crazy. They're not going to enjoy what they're doing. They're not going to like the game. All that kind of stuff. It's like you have to celebrate where they are. And it's so obvious with younger kids, I think, because the size difference, and it's so obvious where you're like, no, why would I yell at this 6-year-old like I would a 20-year-old? That clearly doesn't make sense. But then I think we do that to ourselves, where it's like, why would I yell at myself like I've been in business for 40 years? I just started this. Like, I just started my first company. Why am I treating myself like I'm freaking Elon Musk? It's like, treat yourself to an honest standard of where you're at, I think is an important piece there.
What do you mean, Cam? You're not going to Mars?
I'm working. It's on the list, Timothy. Come on.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's amazing, but it's so true. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, I have young kids myself, and I'm, constantly reminding myself, like, the things that we teach our kids at a young age, they just echo and reverberate in their minds as they grow up. And, we end up repeating those same patterns. So when we learn to find our compass and our purpose internally and hold ourselves to the progress we've made and where we've come from, that's the best standard, really. It's competing with who you used to be and who you want to be.
All right. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about Kaizen, the company, but it's also the Japanese philosophy, I remember right, of how to run an organization. I'm probably not saying it right, that I thought was started in Toyota. Did I remember all that right?
I'm not actually sure. It is a Japanese term, and one interpretation is to become good through change. In other words, is incremental improvement. Yeah, so it's a beautiful term.
Yeah. So how did you discover that? Was it luck of the draw? They hired you, or was it that's really interesting and you went off in that direction?
So I actually discovered that as a philosophy somewhere in the literature. I don't remember where I read about it as incremental change or incremental improvement, and it fits really beautifully with the idea of habits and tiny changes, I think, and daily effort. Funny enough, and coincidentally, I did work for a company named Kaizen Approach, and they founded that company based on, I think they found the term Kaizen in the project management literature. And again, to become good through change, incremental improvement. So that term has found its way back into my life in multiple ways.
Yeah. And part of the reason I brought it up is because there was a time period, I think roughly, let's say 10 years ago or so, it was really popular. You heard about it a lot. And then, it's kind of dropped off in popularity now. Not that it's not still an accurate process. I don't know. I wonder why it kind of faded away. Is it just not the new shiny object anymore, or what?
I think I was just going to throw it in, not knowing specifically with this term, but I do think there's a lot of a cultural cycle of look how cool Japan is, and let's take all these terms. It's gosh, and it's like, well, if and I know Dad, you traveled more than me, but it's like if you go to enough places and learn enough about them, it's like there's cool stuff everywhere. And I think it's a little bit of we just get that cycle of the shiny object of ooh, look what they're doing over there. That's so different, even though it's the same. It's the same thing just translated. Maybe that's a pessimistic way of looking at it. I don't know.
I'd say it's more a realist way of looking at it than a pessimist way of looking at it, as a realist myself. So, yeah, well, it really leads me to thinking about what I learned. And I love that bit of advice you gave for our CEOs, small business, folks that are spending all their time working in their business is step out of the office, whether it's a home office or shop or whatever, and go someplace else and take that hour to think on the business, separate yourself, create a different environment. That's such great advice. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
I'm stopping myself from laughing there because that's 2 episodes in a row where you started talking about what you learned right as the cuckoo clock went.
I know it.
Oh, it's funny. It's authentic. No, but for me and, Timothy, it's funny. I think you used this as an answer to a different question, but really for me, it is the right answer to the habit of, making sure you're in the micro when you need to be in the micro and in the macro when you need to be in the macro. And the term you used was orienting habit. And I think that is just one of those, it's like, oh, I feel like I've coached that idea to a lot of people. And that is just a clean way to put it, orienting habit. And I really love that.
Timothy, how about you, man? What'd you learn?
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot of ground. I mean, I really love the idea of, just keeping the sights on something big and even, so big it feels impossible or intangible. And then, as a leader, giving credit where credit's due, as well as that, that can include your internal sense of giving yourself credit, right? So I loved how Cam brought that back to his work with kids right now. And, just a reminder that those lessons stay with us throughout our life.
Awesome. Timothy, how do folks find you, follow you, learn what you got going on next?
Yeah. So my website is Aetos Consulting. It'll be in the show notes, I'm sure. AETOS Consulting .biz. That's really the best way to get in contact with me. I do free consultations for anybody who's looking to see, what kind of habits and insights would benefit their business and their life.
Awesome. Timothy, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I've loved it. Thank you.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank y'all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Timothy Forward, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes is available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.